I imagine my personal point of view, there seems to be quite a lot of sort of signaling through eye movement. Again, this isn't supported by the scientific data necessarily, but there's, they're very sensitive to where each other are looking, or at least they appear to be. And I remember one chimp. He's died, although he leaves a lot of offspring at Ngogo. But there was a chimp that featured in a film I made a few years ago at Ngogo, and his name was Pincer. And when I first saw shots of Pincer, I felt this something different about this chimp, and I don't know what it is. And in hindsight, I can't really believe that I couldn't spot it, but there was something just seemed very human about him. And I was sort of looking more closely, and I realized Pincer had sort of completely white sclera, like you and I, right? So, when I look over like that, you know exactly where I'm looking, and that's it's an important part of human cooperation. We follow each other's gaze, and therefore what it is I'm interested in, or maybe what I'm about to do. But in chimps, I was reading around it after I saw this chimp Pincer with his white sclera, whites of the eyes. Officially, chimps don't have this characteristic. They're supposed to all have brown. Where we have whites of the eyes, they have brown. So the difference in color between the iris and here is less similar.
So
there we go.
This is that one.
Yeah. Okay. It's a good one. That's not even the best sort of picture of Pincer. And obviously you can see a bit of discoloration, they look like quite unhealthy whites of the eyes there. But he has a very defined difference between his iris and whites of the eyes. So with Pincer, even at a distance, you can see where he's looking. That may not seem like much, but in a species where we don't fully understand their communication, or they appear to be doing things without any vocalizations, I wondered, how come Pincer's got this, and what impact does it have? I talked to, there are other examples of actually, and there was a chimp in Gombe, I think he was called Mr. Wurzel, who had very good example of whites of the eyes as well. But we started looking into it at Ngogo, and I started talking to the scientists about it, and they were like, well, yeah, Pincer does have whites of the eyes. We've never really thought about it that much, and it's not that they didn't notice, but as filmmakers with our lenses and things, we're often looking at the chimps in a level of detail that the scientists don't see every day. So in a way, we're sort of providing them with some sort of visual data that was of interest, and actually they did a proper study on it at Ngogo and tried to find how many chimps at Ngogo had this sort of whites of the eyes. And they found, I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was quite a reasonable percentage of it. Either had it, Pincer's a great example, but had some version of that. They don't know why this is, but in my sort of excited sort of way, I was thinking, well, here's the biggest group of chimps ever known. They cooperate on levels that you don't see regularly in other chimpanzee groups. They're on these territorial boundary patrols all the time. They hunt all the time. They're very successful on a cooperative level, and they appear to be doing these things in silence. What role do these whites of the eyes play? And anecdotally, the scientists kind of agreed that there was, there's a possibility that it does play some role. Like I say, they're scientists, so it's different. They need the data to support that. But there was, what's interesting about Pincer is that even though he never made it to the top either, but he fathered a huge number of offspring, and he was always there on these cooperative behaviors. So if there's a hunt going on, Pincer's around. So this was, like I say, it was just my hypothesis from a non-scientific point of view, but I thought he played a sort of disproportionate role in sort of cooperative behaviors. But again, it's an area, they know an absolute ton about the chimps in Gogo. It is incredible, from behavior, genetics, everything. They've studied that group of chimps very thoroughly, but there is still a lot they don't know.
So this whites of the eyes characteristic, this is a very unusual characteristic. It's very unusual genetic variation.
It is. I mean,
do his offspring have this?
That's exactly what the scientists wanted to know, because obviously for it to be of like evolutionary benefit, it needs to persist. His offspring don't actually, not in a way that, you know, if every kid that Pincer had sort of came out with these eyes, you would suddenly think, well, he is a little mutation that is he's been reproductively successful, and this could help, and it could actually change. But no, they didn't find that actually. So you know, for instance, Rollins, who's the patrol leader in the West, that's Pincer's son, and he doesn't have that. He's got incredible eyes, actually. They're very piercing, but he doesn't have the same eyes.
How common is that variation?
God, I say we because the scientists generously made me an author on the paper, and I think, you know, I didn't do any of the real science work on it at all, but I think because of the conversations we were having, it inspired that particular study. I think they found that there was, again, don't quote me on the numbers, but something in the order of sort of 13 individuals at Ngogo. So a non-trivial percentage. That sounds very sciencey, but it means that, like, you know, it was a significant percentage, enough to take note of, and that's as far as the studies got. They don't really understand the impact of that, if it has any impact at all. You know, it could just be random variation. And because Ngogo is such a huge group, you know, that you would expect to see more variety and more incidences of things that occur on low levels. So they still really don't understand the role of that. But it was interesting to me on two levels. Like, I thought it was fascinating because it made me just wonder about what's going on behind those eyes. But also as a human, you just engage with Pincer in this, you know, it's like suddenly there's a part of his face that feels a lot more familiar. And I remember one of the scientists who was there years ago when I was there, Kevin Potts, and like I say, they'd say different things around the fire at night as to what they'd say in the scientific papers. Well, I remember Kevin going, "Oh, I'm totally with